Okay, the final video in this series is discussing terrain. Three types of terrain. There's open terrain, which has no effect on movement. There's difficult terrain, which halves the movement value. It costs double to move through. And impassable terrain, which units cannot enter at all. And finally, there is scenario-specific terrain. Now, the first type doesn't have to be decided on. It's just assumed that anything that isn't a special type of terrain is just normal open terrain. Now, difficult terrain has got to be defined either by the scenario, like it is here, like the Fangorn Forest, where those bushes are 8 inches from the table edge. That is difficult terrain. Or the players can agree before the actual game starts what's difficult terrain. Same with impassable terrain. That's either in the scenario or it's agreed up front. Impassable terrain, for example, could be a major river. All right. Now, special terrain can be actually within the scenario rules. Like in this particular scenario, we have the living forest. So if orcs go within, if they move within 3 inches of any forest terrain, they have to roll a die, and on a 4+, they take D3 worth of casualties. Due to the fact that trees will actually attack them. Other things that we've noted in terrain before, you can have advantageous heights, which this is probably the wrong description, but it means that if you've got hills or even tall towers, you can see over the top of other types of terrain. Yet again, that's all got to be either agreed up front or defined within the scenario. Right, defensible terrain, which is going to be the main part of this. Right, now this type of terrain has a capacity, and it can hold only so many fighters. Now, capacities can be assigned before the scenario starts, or they could be in the scenario rules itself. In this particular scenario, the 3 wooded areas which are separated from well, actually, no, that's not true. All 5 wooded areas have a capacity of 6. Each point of capacity allows a defensive terrain feature to shelter a company's worth of warriors. Okay. Now, occupying a terrain feature depends on, you've got to meet the following conditions. The terrain feature is unoccupied. Formation may not enter an occupied feature, although it may charge an enemy formation inside it. The formation is moved so that it's touching the defensible terrain feature, and all companies in the formation are within 6 inches of the feature. A formation may not touch an unoccupied defensive feature if it's not intending to occupy it. The defensible terrain feature capacity is equal to or greater than the number of casualties in the formation. There has to be enough room for everybody. Formations that are too large to occupy a defensible terrain feature may still move through it if they wish. So there's a rule for that. We'll get onto it in a minute. If a formation enters a defensible terrain feature, place it in or on the defensible terrain feature. If that's impractical, place the formation in a defensible terrain feature. If it's impractical to do that, place a representative model in or next to the defensible terrain feature to show that it is occupied, and remove the rest of the formation from the battlefield. The defensive terrain feature is now considered to be the formation for all purposes of range-based contact and so on. Right, entering a terrain feature, a formation may use its move to have a terrain to leave. Oh, sorry. Exiting a terrain feature. A formation may use its move to leave a terrain feature. If a formation leaves the terrain, it must be placed on the battlefield under the following considerations. At least one company must be in contact with the terrain feature. Every company in the formation is placed within 6 inches of the terrain feature, and the formation is legal. Okay. A unit that exits a terrain feature may not move further that phase. For the purpose of shooting, it's considered to have moved at half rate, so it can't actually shoot. All of its move is used up in leaving the terrain feature. We have another little rule here called death beyond the gates. Warriors are unwilling to leave the safety of defences when the enemy are in sight. A formation which wishes to leave a defensive terrain feature while there's an enemy within 6 inches must immediately pass a courage check or remain inside. Defensive terrain features give a defensive bonus. This is like this little table here. What type of terrain and who can occupy it. Right, shooting at defensible terrain. All shooting attacks or other attacks that are made at range, such as magical powers made against the defensible terrain feature, are measured to its centre, not to its edge. We assume that the defenders are spread out throughout the feature. A defensible terrain feature never prevents a shooter from seeing the formation inside. Depending on the type of terrain, an occupying unit receives a bonus to its defence to represent warriors taking cover behind walls, trees or other obstacles, which we've already seen that table for. Right, shooting from a defensible terrain feature. A formation in defensible terrain may shoot. Assume the warriors occupying the terrain can find suitable vantage points for their archery. Due to the nature of defensible terrain, the formation may only shoot with half the number of companies equal to half the capacity of the defensible terrain feature, rounded up. So, example, if you've got a formation with 6 companies that is inside, say that forest there, it could only shoot with 3 of its companies. Charging a defensible terrain feature. A formation occupying can be charged as normal. It's considered to be occupying the same space as the terrain feature, so the charge is completed against the defensible terrain feature as if it was in itself a formation. All attacking companies in base contact with the defensible terrain feature fight directly. Other companies make supporting attacks. The occupying formation is considered to have neither a flank or a rear. The occupying troops use the various defences to counter such weaknesses. As a result, it will not lose dice for flank or rear charges. Not all the companies in the occupying formation can fight directly. It must defend with a number of companies up to half the capacity of the defensible terrain feature again. So yet again, if there were 6 companies inside that forest up there, only 3 of them could actually defend as normal. The others would have to make supporting attacks. The attacker receives no extra dice for charging a formation in defensible terrain. No, that's big, that is. So you'd lose, obviously you're going to lose your charge bonus, which for cavalry is an extra 6 dice, which is pretty pointless charging a forest anyway, but it's good they thought about all this. A formation occupying a terrain feature loses a fight. It must take a panic test as normal. Unless the formation is steadfast, it must immediately exit the defensible terrain features described earlier in this section of the rules. If it cannot do so, for whatever reason, it's removed from play. Got this rule here. Formation cannot occupy defensible terrain if it has more companies than the feature can support. However, any formation is allowed to move through an unoccupied defensible terrain feature, counting it as difficult terrain in all respects. As a result, the formation receives no defensive bonus for being in the terrain feature, and it can be shot at as easily as if it were in the open. Whilst the formation remains in the terrain feature, all other formations on both sides treat it as difficult terrain. It cannot be occupied until the formation moves away. Note that companies may not use this rule to enter terrain that which they normally be prevented from occupying for reasons other than capacity. For example, cavalry could still not enter buildings, for example. Okay, and that's it for terrain. Whoa. That was a lot more complicated than I expected, but it does make sense.